Are we live? Goedemiddag and welcome in Kunstinstituut Melly. In today's program, we are delighted and honored to officially mark the launch of Vistas of Modernity, an essay on decolonialist thesis written by Associate Professor Rolando Vazquez, co-published by the Mondriaan Fund and Japsam Books. Today's book launch is co-presented by the Mondriaan Fund and Kunstinstituut Melly, and I'm Vivian Zahol, Research and Programs Manager at Kunstinstituut Melly. It is almost 1 year since Vázquez completed the text of Visions of Modernity, and it's just under a year since the original planned launch. So it really is a milestone to be able to gather together today in launching and reflecting on the significance of this publication to the stakes of decolonization, both artistically and among institutions in the Netherlands. In this time here, we have also assumed our new name of Kunstinstituut Melly, and I would like to extend a personal thanks to Associate Professor Vazquez for his involvement in leading a public engagement forum, as well as in presenting at our public review, and in general for his work with us, negotiating the praxis of theory and institutional transformation. In the lead up to this program, 3 reading groups have taken place, and thanks to the reading group moderators, who have been Sasha Huber, Sakai Makoni, and Wendelin van Oldenborg, as well as all of the readers who participated from various locations in the Netherlands and abroad in Ghent, Paramaribo, and Johannesburg, among others. We're very happy to have some of the reading group readers in the room, and thank you again, Rolando, for joining the closing of each of those sessions. They were very rich and rewarding. Today's program takes place here in Melly as well as online, and we welcome all of our visitors, both physically present and virtual. The proceedings will commence with a welcome by Kunstinstituut Melly Director, Sophia Hernandez Choi, followed by some words of introduction by the Director of the Mondriaan Fund, Elke van der Linden. The moderator of our program, Nancy Jouwe, will then introduce our keynote by Professor Gloria Wekker, who will address the significance of Vázquez Vistas of Modernity in the Netherlands and further afield. Following the keynote, Jouwe will moderate a Q&A together with Professor Wekker and Associate Professor Vázquez. And those who are in our parallel live stream here in the building can convey questions via the host in the room. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sophia Hernandez Choi for a welcome.
I'm very happy to see people back here at Melly, both as a public and as speakers. It's been a long time that we haven't had gatherings of this kind to be able to learn together and discuss in a convivial space and environment. It's been a very beautiful day, beginning with a performance of Michiel Huibin, who is upstairs in the exhibition of Sasha Huber, which is where I will go immediately after Elko's word. And that is where we have a live stream of this conversation with a whole other audience that cannot fit in this room. As you could see, the distance between the chairs and the amount of people in the space are related to social distancing measures that we have to keep in place. So I will be joining the group upstairs and listening the live stream that we are also having for public elsewhere to enjoy. I really want to thank Rolando, who has been really an inspiration and an advisor on every facet of the last year in the program. He is, together with Tiana, here in the back, also someone that we have had conversations not only about the transformation of this institution, but the ways in which the Netherlands has been transforming as of late, because there is new knowledge that is circulating and new experiences or old experiences that are finally being voiced. I think that the launch today with the keynote of Professor Wekker is relevant because she is one, through her work, that has invited so many people to rethink what is said, what has been silenced, and how we can listen better, learn better, and do better. At this institution, we have really worked towards goals of achieving not only inclusivity, but more than anything also accessibility. How can our texts, how can our physical environment, how can even ourselves as a team be much more accessible to the public that is interested in engaging with the arts or that has a latent interest, and that we can bring them closer to the arts in a warming way without a feeling of being non-experts, as we have in the arts been generally associated with, that it's a very small group. And it is a small group of people that want to experiment, I understand that, but at the same time, many people want to experience experimentation so they can rethink their own value systems differently. So this is just a welcome to you. There are many colleagues within this room and also upstairs, and general audiences that have come here also for the first day to an institution because it's Open Monuments Day. And that means that not only is this a building part of the monuments of the city that people that have never visited us are coming to visit and to learn about, but also to learn with all of us of art and theory that is shaping our lives today. So welcome everyone. Elko, thank you for always being a great supporter, and also for Mondriaan Fund for co-presenting this book launch with us.
We'll do the microphone first. It's like a little performance. Thank you. Yeah, it's fine. Well, thank you, Sophia. And thank you all for coming today. I think it's really wonderful that we finally can do these kind of things again. As most of you will know, the book by Rolando has been published over some time ago already. We had a miniature book launch in our office when Rosa de Velde and Rolando came to see the first copies. We had coffee in our hallway. It was a lovely meeting, but I'm really happy we can do a proper one with all of you as well, finally. And hopefully we can do many more of these kind of events in the future. The Vistas of Modernity is an essay from the Mondriaan Fund in the series. There is no direct link between the different themes in the series, other than we use the essays as spark plugs, as an initial thought to help us get discourse in the art world, in the world of heritage, about certain subjects. And as such, we're very happy when a subject gets taken by someone commissioned from outside to be looked at thoroughly, but then after that is taken into the field and discussed further, in the end helping us to form new policies. And as I've discussed in the foreword, we had a subject by Steven Tije, who originally looked at the emancipation within museums. We felt that afterwards we had to delve in that further, and I'm really happy that Rolando took the invitation to do so. But in doing that, he helped us with a lot more than we thought. We are, as the Mondriaan Fund, we are a public fund. We represent everybody in the Netherlands because they pay towards us. So it's very important that whatever we do is also contributing to everybody's lives in the Netherlands, and we have to acknowledge that that's not always the case. With this book, Rolando helps us to look into that, in the backgrounds of that, what are the causes of that, and it helps us to achieve a much bigger subject than maybe just as an essay normally does, but it normally just picks up on a certain topic. So thank you, Rolando, because it's going to help us for many, many years to come. And I'd also like to thank Rosa de Velde, who has been a great supporter for you as well. And for the Mondriaan Fund, I would like to thank Carmen Musquet, I think was, yeah, there you are. And Mirjam Beerman, who's worked on the essay for the Mondriaan Fund. And it's been an essay which has taken a very long time to produce. I hope it will also take a very long time still that we'll discuss it. And as I said, we do the spark plugs. The art and heritage field have to take it from that. So I very much like to thank Melly for taking up that role, organizing these kind of events, organizing the reading groups, organizing the keynote, which I'm very much looking forward to. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Yeah, I'm loud and clear. Oh my God. Welcome to this very festive event, the publication launch of Rolando Vazquez, Vistas of Modernity, Decolonial Aesthesis, and the End of the Contemporary. A publication which came out recently and which has been commissioned by the Mondriaan Fund. This event, as you've just heard, is being co-hosted by the Mondriaan Fund and Kunstinstituut Melly. So my name is Nancy Jouwe. I will try to usher us through this celebratory event. And I want to give a warm welcome to everyone here tuning in today, both as a live audience, so nice to have, 3D people in the room, but also via our live stream. And of course, a warm welcome, especially to you, Rolando Vazquez, and also Gloria Wekker. I want to also say hi to Daniela, your daughter, who's also here with you, Rolando. Rolando and Gloria are main speakers of today, and I will introduce you to them. Rolando Vazquez Melken is an educator, sociologist, and decolonial writer and thinker. He's one of the cluster chairs at the University College Utrecht, and as a Utrecht person, I'm very happy about that, of course. An associate professor of sociology and diversity fellow at University College Roosevelt in Middelburg, and an affiliated researcher at the Gender Studies Department and at the Research Institute for Cultural Inquiry, the ICON, of the Faculty of Humanities, the University of Utrecht. Since, was it 2009 or 2010, Rolando? 2010? 10. Since 2010, he coordinates the annual Maria Lugones Decolonial Summer School, together with Walter Mignolo, which is now being hosted at the Van Abbe Museum, and the director is with us as well. And I have to say, I was happy to be part of the 2015 cohort. He co-authored the report of the Diversity Commission of the University of Amsterdam in 2016 under the direction of Gloria Wekker. And he founded the initiative CRIDE, Critical Decoloniality, for sharing of decolonial practices among academic and cultural institutions. So that's Rolando. Now, Gloria Vecker is an Afro-Surinamese Dutch cultural and social anthropologist with specializations in gender studies, sexuality, African American, and Caribbean studies. She is an emerita professor in gender studies at Utrecht University, and I think I was her first student of color, and you were my first professor of color. So this is why we stuck to each other for now almost 3 decades. Among her noteworthy publications are The Politics of Passion, Women's Sexual Culture in the Afro-Surinamese Diaspora in 2006, for which she received the Ruth Benedict Prize of American Anthropological Association, and of course, White Innocence, the book is here on show in the room, Paradoxes of Colonialism and Race from 2016, which created quite some waves in Dutch society. This year also marks the 20th anniversary of the publication Kaleidoscopic Visions, the Black Migrant and Refugee Women's Movement that Wekker co-edited with Maaike Botman and myself, which you, by the way, can still access for free online at the Women's Archive in Amsterdam. In this publication, the notion of intersectionality was first introduced in the Netherlands, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later on. In 2017, she received the Joke Smit Award for her long-standing work on the betterment of the position of Black women in the Netherlands, and in that same year, she was distinguished as one of the 10 most influential academics in the Netherlands. And between 2019 and 2021, she holds the King Willem Alexander Chair for Lowland Studies at the University of Liège, or in Dutch Luik, in Belgium. That's a mouthful, Gloria. Well, in our program, we will first hear, of course, a keynote speech by Professor Emerita Gloria Wekker, after which Rolando, Gloria, and I will have a conversation for about 30 minutes, which will then be followed and hopefully give you ample time also to ask questions. So to our audience, please listen along, think along, write along as this conversation unfolds. As Melly notes on their website, the launch program will explore the historical context and present vocabularies of urgent debates regarding the inclusiveness of art institutions such as museums and contemporary art spaces. Now, Vazquez's publication offers a decolonial critique of the modern colonial aesthetic order. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit from the book here, just to give you a little introduction. While unraveling this, he uses a selection of postcards, hence the format of the book. And these postcards provide vistas of modernity. The word vista, in Dutch we could say vergezicht, a pleasing view, already leads us to the notion of pleasure and aesthetics of modernity, which steers us in a certain way of looking, the workings of the white gaze, and that's exactly what the book is all about. The postcard in this way kind of works as a metaphor of the everyday. I remember, for instance, my father as an anti-colonial activist and lobbyist traveling around at least 10 different countries on the African continent, but also the UN in New York City around the 60s and 70s, and he would always send me postcards, but only from New York, never from the African continent. Vazquez's publication follows a decolonial path of research, explaining the constitution of modernity, the coloniality of aesthetics, the notion of colonial difference, but in the end, the post phase also helps us in finding some guidance in what it means to decolonize and the what, the who, and the how of it all. Asking key questions and a focus on healing and justice, and so these will be some of the things that we will discuss. And I would now like to invite Gloria Wekker to present her keynote speech. Gloria, you have the floor, and help me in welcoming her.
So it's good, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Very welcome to this festive occasion. And it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce you to the work of my colleague, my friend and comrade, Rolando Vazquez, today. I also want to welcome his daughter, Daniela, and I shout out to Rosalba, who is in Mexico. I'm extending congratulations to Melly and the Mondriaan Foundation for having facilitated and made the publication of this important essay possible. I want to speak to you today first about who Rolando is, as it becomes apparent from his essay, how we got to know each other, and about the significance of his work in the Netherlands. Secondly, I will highlight why his essay, Vistas of Modernity, is an erudite, necessary, and appealing introduction to decolonial thought, a jewel of clarity and of poetic beauty. I want to give a reading tip first, and as I read the book and just heard just now that there already have been reading groups around the book, I think that is an excellent idea, and that it is really, it would be very worthwhile to read the text together in such groups, which is also in keeping with the injunction that Rolando gives us, that we need to value individuality, the individual relationship to the text of the imperial I. We need to value that individuality less than being in relation with each other, reading together and listening to each other. I would also say that I would be very interested in paying attention to and discussing the different ways that Rolando, throughout the text, describes and analyzes important concepts like what is coloniality, what is decoloniality, what is colonial aesthesis, decolonial aesthesis, what is the colonial difference, because he comes back again and again to these various concepts in a seemingly tireless attempt to make us aware of, to make us feel and sense his very rich body of thought. Finally, as the last item on my agenda, I will raise some issues that we can talk about during our conversation, and I will raise some issues directly to Rolando. So Rolando is from Abiyala, the Americas, Mexico, to be precise. He did his PhD in sociology at the University of Warwick in the UK, and he currently has an appointment at University College Utrecht. We got to know each other through our joint work for the Diversity Commission at the University of Amsterdam in 2015-16. We were actually introduced, or both chosen, by Mitchell Assayas to occupy a seat on this commission. And the report that we delivered, Let's Do Diversity, may have been the first time that an official academic report took both a decolonial and an intersectional approach in the Netherlands. I have to say that Rolando and Rosalba introduced me to decoloniality. So this report that we delivered with about 90 recommendations in it, how to work towards an inclusive, radically egalitarian and diverse both in terms of people and in terms of curricula, towards such a university. It is not to say that the University of Amsterdam followed our recommendation, but our collaboration in that committee, in the eye of a public storm, hate mail, severe time pressure on us, was incredibly enriching. And I do not hesitate to say that Let's Do Diversity still stands and is a resource to universities or other institutions who really want to make a difference, who want to give proper weight to the colonial difference and to humble, in Rolando's terms, modernity. We explicitly chose to set a high, cutting-edge standard to attain to. We talked about that because many people advised us not to be so, so radical, put it in a language that everybody can understand and relate to, but we felt we only have one chance to put it down as it should be, and we are going to take that chance. Okay, so subsequently, after the Diversity Commission, Rolando invited me to become part of the pool of teachers at the Decolonial Summer School, and I taught there for the first time in 2016. And it was then at University College Roosevelt in Middelburg, and since 2020, the summer school is located at the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven. The last two editions were taught online. So this year's summer school was the 12th edition. Rolando and Walter Mignolo took the initiative to organize the summer school, and their vision is its backbone. And I'm deeply grateful for having been offered the opportunity to become a part of the summer school. This has been one of the better decisions in my life to join it, because it is a community, an intellectual and familiar home that one can only dream of finding in the regular academy, that is, if one is black or of color. At least I never managed to find a home in academia. The summer school is a place where a diverse group of artists and academics from all over the world come together. Some stay for a couple of days, others for the entire 2 weeks. We basically talk with each other about what we have been thinking and writing about this past year. We try out new ideas, we comment and ask questions to each other, and the students are a part of our exchange. I personally have had the wonderful possibility to dialogue several times with Maria Lugones, one of the other elders, about our slightly differing understandings of gender. She was of the decolonial feminist school. I consider myself part of intersectional feminism and how these schools overlap and diverge. Maria passed away in July 2020. She has become one of our ancestors, and she passed away just days after our 11th summer school. Others in our circle or very close by have passed away. We share our losses, we engage in ceremony for those we have lost, we celebrate and commemorate Kitikoti, we grieve and we tend to our own and each other's colonial wounds. We have a communal life, and for those of us who live in the Netherlands, that extends beyond the summer school. For instance, Rolando regularly comes to have breakfast with me in Amsterdam, but we also meet with others in the summer school, like Patricia Kaarsenhout, Aldo Ramos, and Rosalba, of course. I have noticed also at summer school what a wonderful teacher Rolando is. He's accessible, friendly, and generous. Most of all, he is humble. His humbleness is apparent in his essay, where he consistently speaks in a we form. This is not a royal we that is often full of hubris. On the contrary, it is a we that acknowledges that, and I'm quoting him, we are thinking from a shared legacy, from a consciousness, not of owning, but of owing. The we voice allows a way of thinking that is necessarily grounded in the relationship with others, and it is aware that it is impossible to speak and think truthfully from a position of abstraction and purity, from everywhere and nowhere, the thinking that expels the I, that has claims on universality and not on positionality, the thinking that has been propagated as the highest form of thinking in modernity. The we only comes to voice in the awareness of its infinite indebtedness to others. One of the things that Rolando and I, from my perspective, have in common is that we have, based on our positionings, publicly taken positions that are generally not welcomed. We have, from a dominant perspective, been the bringers of bad news. We have, in our own ways and languages, Rolando from a decolonial, I from an intersectional perspective, told a family of alcoholics that they really do have a drinking problem. In a country that prides itself on being open, tolerant, proverbially anti-racist, and deeply committed to equality, we have said, stop, let's have a look at that rosy self-representation again. The Netherlands is fundamentally still a colonial society in which race, and in Rolando's terms, the colonial difference, plays an important role. In my mind, we have both had to confront the question of how to survive in an academic environment that doesn't value subjugated, oppressed, contrary, critical knowledges in its midst, that really prefers more of the same knowledge production, that doesn't take its own positioning with regard to modernity and its erasure of coloniality into account. For me, that is now no longer as pressing as I am emerita. I cannot but echo the late Martin Luther King Jr.'s words, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. The university, in my experience, has been a factory where the same cookies with small variations are being produced, and they are thought to be the best and the finest cookies ever, over and over again. What this has meant, and I must stress again in my experience, I'm not necessarily speaking for Rolando here, he's far humbler than I am, is that one needs to know the generally accepted bodies of knowledge in one's discipline, be able to criticize them and point to their shortcomings, to their embeddedness in a particular context, and only then can one show one's own diverging argument and point of view. In other words, we have had to do double or triple labor, and that is basically true for anyone who does not fit the mold of the traditional cookie baker. It is only recently that a project like Waarderen en Erkennen, appreciate and acknowledge, potentially opens more possibilities within the academic evaluation system than being an excellent, that is, traditional cookie baker / researcher. I'm referring to a recent development that wants to broaden the appreciated qualities of an academic. For instance, one's teaching abilities might be more appreciated than is currently the case. One could conceivably then also become, in the words of Thomas Kuhn, a physicist who wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, a young Turk, someone who breaks out of the accepted paradigms in one's discipline, someone who opens new terrain. That is who Rolando is and what he does. If it were up to me, Rolando would long have had a university chair in which he could think, write, teach about whatever he wants to think write, and teach with, as he calls it, because it will be to all our benefits. Actually, Rolando's presence in the Netherlands as a major decolonial thinker and disseminator of decolonial knowledge is a rare and fortunate circumstance. He's an emissary from a Latin American school of thought that is too often and grossly overlooked by traditional academic circles. It is interesting to me to explore why it is that art and museum institutions seem more interested in decolonial thought and practice than academia generally is. I'm not saying that this interest in decoloniality is a generalized one across all museums. Certainly not. Contra-examples easily spring to mind, especially when I'm thinking of a museum like Tervuren near Brussels and all the money that has been put into its refurbishment, into the re-erection of this monument of modernity. It is clear that that would be greatly overstating the case. Frankly, I think that the only viable option for a museum like that would be if it would centrally devote itself to the genealogy of its coming into being. A self-reflexive place where Belgium would think about how its own superiority and the abjection of the African other became so central to its own self-representation. I used to give my students an assignment in a course that I taught for 20 years, Politics of Representation. I will return to that course in a bit. I gave them the assignment to pick two museums, one of which would preferably be Tervuren before its refurbishment, and to study and describe main ingredients of the self-representation that spoke from its collection and the ways in which objects were displayed. So in the conversation section that we will have after my talk, I'd be interested, Rolando, to hear your thoughts on this difference that I perceive in interest in decoloniality between the academy on the one hand and art and museum institutions on the other. Second part, that is about the essay. I want to speak about the appealing form and the substance of the book, which, as I said, I find lucid and useful. First, about the form, which is innovative and illustrative of pluriversality. It is not written in one voice. The book has different voices with different levels of accessibility. Vistas of Modernity has 5 chapters: decoloniality, modernity, coloniality, the colonial difference, and a postface on what it means to decolonize. In each chapter, we find 2 old postcards illustrating how modernity is constructed. We see the Eiffel Tower, for example, that proverbial sign of modernity, speed, electricity, contemporary, I find this word so hard to pronounce, contemporaneity, yes. Enabling the victorious gaze of modern white men from everywhere and nowhere, juxtaposed against an elephant who is trapped in a big iron contraption. The elephant obviously occupies the pole of animality, but also of eternal sameness, of pastness, of being outside of history. A firm dichotomy is laid out in this and the other postcards about who is the self and who is the other, whether animal, earth and earth beings, or others of color. The postcards layout offer us a particular way of looking at the world, at the self and the other, so Rolando elegantly shows us. The postcards chronicle how inescapable and natural the superior self-positioning is that is offered. It is inescapable. There's another postcard of hippopotamuses who have just been killed, supposedly in the service of a scientific expedition into Africa. And the hippos are complemented by the victorious white hunters standing on top of them. This is not a thing of the past. Just this week, we were alerted to the fact that King Willem-Alexander, once his domain had closed off for the public in order to do his guilty pleasure hunting. So we have carried that with us into the present. The descriptions and analyses of the postcards are a first layer in the essay. Then there are, as a second layer, the works of art by decolonial artists, some of them connected to the summer school, which again are described and critically analyzed from a perspective of the colonial difference, that central dichotomy that determines who can belong and who cannot. A dichotomy that plagues us to this day and that we need to overcome. Of course, the decolonial artists take a decolonial positioning. A third layer is concerned with different sections in each chapter that theoretically engage the overarching theme in that particular chapter. The different layers in each chapter are in differently colored pages, white, cream, and light brown. So you can choose which direction you want to follow, what you want to engage with, whether you want to read the postcard section, or you want to read the art section, or the theoretical sections. I do not want to delude you into thinking that especially the theoretical sections are easy reading. That is why I gave you the reading tip to give it a chance in a reading group. Earlier, I mentioned the course I gave at the Department of Gender Studies at Utrecht University, Politics of Representation, in which I taught students critical literacy with regard to images, TV, films, and everything visual that daily feeds and teaches us the content of what it means to be human, modern, an individual, and of course, white. And all of that always already means being superior to animals, earth, and others of color, and taking distance from them. Who is included and who is excluded from that dominant imagery? That, as Rolando says, choreography of thinking and sensing. I'm deeply elated to see how Rolando deepens and theoretically grounds his work in the decolonial path. Then I'll say something about substance. Let me first say, I'm not often moved by academic work, but I am by the poetic quality of this work. There's an urgency to it. We cannot continue like this. All our lives are on the line, is the subtext. picking up also on our relationship to earth and earth beings. The poetic is inherent in Rolando's style of writing, which is repetitive. It is like a chant. The things he writes are so important, and I'm afraid too many, so unusual and new, that he wants to make sure that we really get it by repeating it in slightly different terms every time. I hear his teaching voice. It jumps out at me from every page. I was going to give you a quote, but I think in the service... Yeah, kunnen we? Okay. This is from the theoretical passage, The Vortex. And this is the chapter, The Colonial Difference. This is what Rolando says. One can picture the unfolding of the colonial difference as a raging vortex. A vortex is een wervelwind, een werveling, that takes into its hold, extirpating, eviscerating, rooting out all that lies under its sway, earth beings, communal bodies, and worlds of meaning. Its gyratory motion is made of concentric and eccentric forces. They at one and the same time extirpate and expel. They despoil, they appropriate by laying waste. The vortex of the colonial difference absorbs everything into the unfathomable abyss of empty time. It is instrumental for bringing the heritage of earth and of worlds of sensing and meaning into the hold of modernity's historical reality. Its hollow center, the empty now of modernity, is out of joint with the enduring absence of the colonial wound, the absence of what has been lost under its sway. This is what I mean. I cannot hope to do justice to the complexity of the essay, not even if I would have 2 hours to speak to you, but I do want to lay out some of its key movements through addressing 2 issues that spoke to me with extraordinary force. One is Rolando's various descriptions throughout the essay of the colonial wound, which I urge you to read well. And that is in the framework of his argument that what the choreography of modernity's thesis, its thinking and sensing, gave us is a reality in which the enjoyment, the pleasure of the modern self became wound up based on the suffering, the torture of others. So there's this juxtaposition between pleasure, enjoyment of the white self, which is based on the violation and the suffering of the other. And many people have written about this, but I find it especially captivating how Rolando writes about it. So this juxtaposition, it may pertain to basic examples like having a bar of chocolate or our enjoyment of our mobile phones and everything they enable us to do, or the buying of cheap clothes that have been produced in the South. The people who have worked at giving us those pleasures at considerable costs to themselves are routinely erased. But in combination with the section on the coloniality of gender, which I read with much interest, another abyss opens, in which the sexual behavior of white colonial men with women of color in the colonies is another example of the colonial wound. Many colonial societies were structured exactly along those lines, where white men would have formal marriages with white women and have white children with them. On the other hand, they simultaneously had informal liaisons, sometimes on a longer term basis, sometimes just incidentally with women of color, and have children of color with them. That is the basic principle of how colonial societies came into being, based on the unlimited sexual access that white men had to all women. Such sexual relations, in the latter case with women of color, were often not a matter where consent of the woman was desirable or necessary. Black women, women of color, were property, so they could be raped at will. Again, we find an instance of unbridled white male pleasure, often based on the violation of black women, women of color. Interestingly and ironically, this genealogy of colonial societies has been thoroughly erased in the one-sided histories that have been written about colonialism, until especially black women started to rewrite those histories. I'm mentioning this example specifically because, of course, it's my field of study, but also because I am so elated that it illustrates to me how Rolando and I often arrive at the same conclusions through different routes, through the different genealogies in which we are embedded. Finally, in closing off this presentation, which will hopefully induce you to grapple with the essay, I want to make a connection with this last part of my presentation. I want to raise another question for discussion with you, Rolando. Apart from the question that I already raised about the difference between the appeal in the academy and in art institutions, there's one other issue that I would like to put forward and that I'd like to hear you on. That is that I'm often asked, also with regard to let's do diversity, how exactly decoloniality and intersectionality relate. When intersectionality is concerned with an amalgam of social and symbolical grammars of difference, for instance, gender, race, class, sexuality, age, religion, and so on and so forth, and how these grammars interact and co-construct each other, then the thing that is puzzling to many people is, what does one then still need decoloniality for? In other words, if one practices intersectionality, why does one still need decoloniality? Of course, I'm in favor of doing and mentioning both, but I think it will be useful to all of us if you could lay that out for us.
Are we on? Mics, check, check. Let's get some water.
ik dichterbij? Ja.
Right, here we are. Let's take a breather for a minute. And thank you so much, Gloria, for that wonderful, it's like a laudatio, eh? It's like you're being honored for like, on and on and on. How are you doing after this, being the humble person that you are?
It's not easy.
It's not easy, huh?
Let's not make him cry.
Oh, really? Are you ready to cry already? Almost. I'm known for making people cry sometimes, but that's because then I cry with them, right? Because, yeah, we're being touched communally. Okay, well, we have around a little less than an hour in which, let's say, half of that time we will have a conversation with the three of us. While you're taking your breaths, also just try and land on this table. But also take questions and remarks from the audience in the room. There's a very rich, wonderful audience here, but also online. So we're also very, very curious to hear from you, and hopefully we will. Professor Wekker made my work very easy in basically stating very two clear questions that we can basically discuss, and I think they're wonderful questions. So I would propose first to go to you, Rolando, for a bit and see how you are landing in this room, in this moment, festive moment also, and then after that also pick up on the questions that you raised, Gloria. And as we all know each other, I'm going to relate to you as Gloria and Rolando. So, in your work, Rolando, well, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm really happy, thank you.
You're really, really happy. Why? Why are you happy?
Well, as Gloria said, it's a moment of celebration, and and I think receiving the gift of Gloria's reception is very beautiful.
And as you also explain in your book, the way you write, you don't, this is obviously not a quick fix. On the contrary, it's a form of slow scholarship, if you will. And in a way, the reception of the book has gone a similar path, because your book was already published last year, but only now we're doing the festive presentation of it. So audiences have already had the opportunity to read, think along with you, speak also to you about it. It was already mentioned in the introduction that there had been a couple of reading groups actually diving into the different chapters of the book. So I don't think we should really go into the whole book necessarily, but because people have to basically buy the book and read it, right? Or do your summer school, which is really, really awesome. But I do want to talk with you about this notion, this difference between aesthetics and aesthesis, because it's so fundamental for also being in this institute and also it being commissioned, right? But before we go there, how has the book been received? Because of this, soft landing, as it were, of you and now. Both of you being killjoys, being, to quote Sarah Ahmed. But how have people been responding to your work? Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, it's been, I think it's been a wonderful reception already. We are now with the second edition.
Already?
And,
congratulations, that's amazing.
And it's been circulating in many, many hands, you know, and it's becoming a tool for many people to work with. So I'm really happy about it.
Yeah, because for many people, and we could hear it resonate in a way in Gloria's talk also, there's a lot of difficult words there, right? But which the book actually also unpacks. But you also mentioned that it's been really helpful actually for like artists, practitioners, for the practice of their work. Why is that? How is that? Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, maybe I was thinking what Gloria was saying,
Yeah.
and I think it is part of its poetics. Like the poetic gives different access to different reading.
Right.
So everybody has its own reading and brings out something that is meaningful for them, that makes them feel something, and which is unlike a linear academic text that only means specifically
like
something.
one meaning,
Yeah,
like
has one
linear
research
meaning.
question, one hypothesis.
Yeah.
And
Basically
here,
how we're trained classically, right?
people
in academia.
people from many walks of life and many practitioners from the academia and the arts across cultural institutions and the academia find it meaningful in very different ways.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, it's quite beautiful to see that it's prolific in different hands.
Yeah.
And it means something differently for different people. And it's part of the pluriversality, I think.
Yeah. And as such, it can even maybe function also as a roadmap for people to, and for it to have, as the director of the Mondriaan Fund already mentioned, a long impact, something that will resonate for maybe years to come.
It has many simple and basic questions, and those are the most
Right.
difficult.
Yeah, the questions are simple, the answers are not. That's for sure. But that's how you do decolonial work also. This is in a way what you propose, especially in the end of your book. But let's come to this notion of aesthetics versus aesthesis. I remember Walter Mignolo trying to explain it also in that famous summer course in 2015. And it ties very clearly into this idea of modernity and coloniality as a pairing, and how aesthesis is a way to undo that, to delink from it. Can you take some steps with us? What is that difference between aesthetics versus aesthesis?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer shortly, but I will try.
No, take your
Yes,
time. This is your time.
Well, basically, I think one of the work that has been happening in decoloniality is to realize that power is not just circulating through the state or through capital or through gender. So these are fields that have been well studied in the circulation of power. But I think through this analysis we see how aesthetics is another field where power circulates, and it produces a deep control of the way in which we experience our life, the way we sense, the way we see, the way we taste, the way we perceive the world. So it's not just the control of the representation of the world, but also the control of how we access and how we sense the world, how we embody our own selves, for example. So in a sense, aesthetics is a way of creating a form of regulation and normativity of the senses that will create colonial hierarchies as well, of course, and that will make us enjoy the suffering of others, like Gloria was explaining us. So when we say we need to move from aesthetics, we refer to that system of control and normativity that the institutions of contemporary art have been regulating and managing, and to liberate aesthesis. And aesthesis is the basic idea that we all sense, and that there is other ways of sensing the world, that there is a pluriversality of ways of sensing the world, and especially in connection to relational worlds, for example. that aesthetics suppresses. So when we say we need to decolonize aesthetics to liberate aesthesis, that's what we are meaning. It is a decolonial move.
And so, in a way, those postcards that you describe in the book are a way also to visualize how the aesthetics work, right? For instance, the Eiffel Tower that Gloria already referred to, as a literal materiality of that aesthetics. There's also pointing us in a way to how to look at things. So we're being steered toward that, and that's also. So can you talk a little bit about also that notion of the gaze?
So that is, well, one aspect that is important here for us is that aesthetics is not just the canon of aesthetics. And it is this sphere of the way in which modern subjects are made to sense their world, right? And that's why the postcard is so important, because the postcard is an everyday object. It's not an extreme work of genius of an artist of the canon, or an extreme hidden archive of the police where you see violence that nobody has seen before, or the colonial archive. But it is an everyday object where this aesthetics is expressing itself. I think that is where the practice of the gaze is being regulated.
And so you connected in the book to this notion of the gaze. And the white gaze or the colonial gaze is something that, of course, also in other disciplines is being discussed. So how does that gaze work, and how are we implicated in that gaze then? You're looking at Gloria like, can you get that question? You wrote it down. You're doing
no, of course.
You're doing fine.
No, the question is a very complex question. Because on the one hand, you have the canon regulating the gaze and the idea of the beautiful or the sublime, or the idea of contemporaneity. And, but you also have the gaze as the dominant sense in modernity. And you also have the gaze as a practice of being at a distance from the world, which is why we use the Tour Eiffel as an example of a materiality of that, abstracting yourself from the world in that position of privilege, where you see others, where you speak about others, but you don't speak about yourself, and you don't know who you are historically situated, right? So the gaze is part of that as well, part of that lack of positionality and of responsibility, of course. So it implies so many things, from the canon of the arts to the politics of not being positioned, the normative position being the one that has the power of the gaze, but that is not seen, as famously Haraway explained it, for example, and how that plays across the colonial difference. So that's why I say it's a very complex question, because it goes
it has many layers,
through many layers. And of course, heuristically, or in the way we construct knowledge, is also very important, because we are focusing on representation, and we lose an understanding of the power of reception, of listening, when we praise the gaze and the logic of representation as the primary form of the production of the real. So that's why it cuts across so many different fields. This question of the gaze.
And you really make this case for, well, if we decolonize, we're not just decolonizing, catchphrase has become decolonizing the mind. To decolonize the mind, decolonize epistemology, this notion, knowledge production. Your point is, well, we're forgetting about the aesthetics, and we need to get a deeper understanding of that. And this is not just about museums and beautiful paintings, although that is could be an expression of that, right? So what happens when we converge in decolonial aesthesis? What this notion of reception, can you talk a little bit more about that and the sensing of it, and the joy it hopefully also brings because of erasure that has happened? There's a lot, again, a lot of...
I think Gloria said it very beautifully.
Yeah.
That we need to value less individuality and more being together, right?
That's
and
a great summary in a way of what you're proposing, right?
Yeah. Yes, and it is the idea that meaning comes through relations, whereas you can have success individually, right? Yeah. So this society that praises individualism is putting more emphasis in the self, in the individual self, than in being together. Yeah. When actually the meaningful processes of life are always through togetherness, through the relation. So that is a basic part of it, but obviously philosophically it has very deep consequences. And it has a deep connection to other traditions of thought that do not come from Greece and Rome and the Renaissance and the West, that are traditions based on relationality or communality.
Right. And this is also why for decolonial thinkers it's so important to look at knowledge production that comes, for instance, from indigenous communities, or at least also non-Western thought. Like this notion of, I thought that was very insightful, the term coloniality, for instance, which is something else from colonialism, right? You always say coloniality is like the logic of colonialism, but coloniality in itself is a non-Western phrase, right? It's something, it's to unpack and to make us see differently also how this works. So can you talk a little bit about who came up also with this notion of coloniality and what it helps us to see or unsee?
This is, well, we can see you went through the summer school. But of course, this is one of the fundamental points of decolonial thinking, right? Yeah. That, well, first, colonialism is a Western term, but coloniality is not.
Exactly.
And coloniality is already performing an epistemic shift.
Right.
Right? Because it is a term coined by Aníbal Quijano, and it's a term that is being thought from a positionality of the global South.
Right.
Because no matter how important the Western author is, like Foucault or Deleuze, this was not of their concern,
right?
You know, and so coloniality is naming a global process that the West is not seeing. Yeah. They saw colonialism, but they don't see coloniality, and how to think the world through it, right? So this epistemic shift is what is so important for us.
Yeah.
So, and I think it connects very nicely to the question of Gloria.
Exactly.
Of why we need decoloniality if we have intersectionality, right?
This is
a soft question.
I should have asked Maria.
And it's beautiful
With
that
great danger.
And it's beautiful that you also now name the summer school after her, as also to pay tribute to her work and her legacy, also.
Yes, and of course the book is dedicated to the
her
memory
also,
of Maria Lugones.
Yeah, which I think is really beautiful. Yes, so, okay, so that was... No,
maybe we can go into
exactly,
the question of
exactly
Gloria.
what I wanted to...
maybe you can state your question again, Gloria.
There were two questions, right, Gloria?
Yeah. So this is what often happens.
Yeah.
So both in regard to let's do diversity, that people have read it very well, and they are really interested to know, well, if we already have intersectionality, which deals with race in conjunction with the other grammars of signification, you know, the grammars that circulate in society that give meaning to us, to who we are. All of us have a package, let's say a backpack, on our backs that gives us a position in society based on what gender we are, what race, what class, what sexuality we practice. The combination of all of those things assigns value to us. Now, all of us know that the superior position would be the white heterosexual guy. When you are not in that position in one or more respects, you do not belong to the norm. So you are placed in an inferior position. So intersectionality works with race. So then people ask, so why do we still need decoloniality as a separate body of thought? And I indeed think that we do, but I really want to hear Rolando on it, and then I'll come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gloria. So, well, first, of course, I feel the same as you, that it's not either or. It's not intersectionality or decoloniality, or that they are competing against, right? I think they are really complementary, and I think the decoloniality comes to complement the powerful analytics of intersectionality in different ways, but I will just mention a couple of basic things. So, decoloniality is concerned with the colonial difference, right? So how those axes of discrimination that intersectionality is working with articulate the colonial difference? How they are reproducing coloniality or undoing it. So in a way, decoloniality brings that way of orienting the analysis of intersectionality with the question of coloniality and the colonial difference, right? Because as soon as you cross the colonial difference, race is operating in a different way, gender is operating in a different way. So the work of Maria, right? How Western feminism could not get the coloniality of gender. And it had the access of gender, but it could not see what the coloniality of gender meant as a system of exclusion from sociability, right? So this is, I think the work of Maria is brilliant, showing how intersectionality and gender and coloniality and decolonial analysis can work together, even though she will have her reservations about intersectionality at a very abstract level, right? The second point, I think, is that decoloniality brings immediately, I know intersectionality is also working like that, but it doesn't bring it immediately in its categories, the what for, the politics. So I think intersectionality is making a good analytics of society, of the forms of discrimination and how they intersect. But decoloniality is putting a what for, you know, is to decolonize. We are going towards decolonizing. And so we need intersectionality to decolonize, right? And this is the politics, right? And in a way, it is orienting the powerful analytics of intersectionality that are already oriented, of course, but decoloniality is standing for unsilencing, for justice, for re-existence, which is, of course, what was behind the people that produced intersectional analysis. But it's not naming the intersectional, whereas in the decolonial, it is named. This analytics is for decolonizing, is for unsilencing, is for justice. And so I think in that way they complement very powerfully. So I think what the thinkers of intersectionality, what moved them was a decolonial impetus of unsilencing, of liberating, and they created this powerful analytical tool. So that's how I see it. I think the decolonial is coming to name the politics, the engagement with unsilencing, with justice, that intersectionality is working for, of course. That is my short answer to your big question.
Thanks, yeah.
Can we get some context about this? Because in a side note, one of you said, yeah, because was it Maria Lugones who then also was critical of the intersectionality?
Intersectionality.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, very briefly, Maria had a very philosophical position in which she understood intersectionality at some stage of her work, not in all her work, as just the intersecting of access in single points.
Yeah.
And for her that was not useful because she said we are multiple beings and we are in much more complex situations and intersections. So she had like a very formal opposition to the term as in a geometrical imagination of the term. But of
Is
course
it also because she relates it too much to the individual? Or?
Well, because she had this idea of the plural self.
Yeah.
And, but I think it was a very formal opposition and in the geometrical representation of intersectionality.
Yeah.
But in fact, she was honoring all the intersectional thinkers in her work.
Right. And
Sounds
I,
to me,
for one, have written extensively in Politics of Passion about the plural self. So I couldn't always, place Maria's criticism.
But to me, this also ties into, and this is, you both speak extensively about that, the lack of a shared idiom to begin with when we talk about these matters, aphasia of it all, but also the not just it not being present.
Yeah,
and that
but I think that is a very real thing,
Yeah.
because to me it is useful to remember that decoloniality is a body of thought that originally comes from Latin America, and so we haven't been exposed to it.
Yeah.
Let's face it, there's a geopolitics of knowledge also going on, in which what comes, at least to me, from the United States, and especially black knowledges that are developed and propagated and that circulate in this part of the world, are much more present than Latin American thought. So it is good to have that in the back of your head. And I am so curious that I want to know more about what it is that decoloniality has to offer. And of course, as I said in my presentation, I am so often surprised that Rolando and I or other decolonial thinkers come from very different embedded knowledges, genealogies, but we arrive at the same conclusions, and the two different bodies of knowledge really complement and enrich each other. So I find I'm not in any kind of competition about what is better. I mean, this is what it means to be a scavenger theorist. That is how I consider myself. I take from this school of thought what I can use, and from another school of thought another methodology or set of ideas, in order to try to understand the world better. And I find a lot in intersectional feminism as it came to us from black feminists, but also Latin American feminists living in the United States, who also played an important part in it.
Gloria Anzaldúa, for instance.
Absolutely.
The border thinking.
And so I even have this discussion all the time with my friend Jackie Alexander, who doesn't know why we should engage with decoloniality, because we have it all in intersectionality already. But I find that decoloniality engages in a more minute way, in a more philosophical way also than what I know from intersectionality with the processes that are going on in the colonial difference or coloniality. So here in the Netherlands, now we find decoloniality is becoming a buzzword, which is okay, it's interesting to see that.
And dangerous.
But it is also
And dangerous indeed, yeah.
really. But intersectionality also, that
Totally,
also
yeah.
has been totally taken up by social movements, and I am all for it. But we should have some discipline in how we use those terms, and that we try to read about it and to be informed and not just claim the label when you're not doing anything
The work.
to kind of deserve that.
And you think that's going on too much right now?
Well, I find it kind of interesting when like younger feminists are saying that they are the ones doing intersectionality. This is the first generation, like let's say the fourth generation of feminists who are doing intersectionality. Then I think, so where have you been?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, this is of course the prerogative of younger generations. They always think they're the first, right? And
Right.
then you have to-
The contemporary.
Yeah.
the contemporary. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Going back to exactly what you say in
Yeah.
your subtitle. Vivian, you already have questions, or you have two questions? Okay. So we have a second point of conversation that Gloria wants to, and I want to address that. But we also have questions from the audience. So please, Vivian.
Wait for the mic to come on. Click it.
I think it's on.
Did that do the trick? Now it's on?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Two questions from our parallel space upstairs, our live streaming, and maybe we can take some questions from here. The first question is that Rolando brought the image of the Eiffel Tower as an example of aesthetics, and could he give perhaps an architectural example of aesthesis as a way of clarifying this concept? The second question perhaps has been recently addressed, which is that in the last few years there's been a strong buzz around art institutions and decolonization, which Wekker mentioned in the introduction, and should we embrace this fully, or are there some areas that we should be careful of?
That we should be
Careful of, which was very much the recent point. Are we gathering questions? Or?
Yeah, are there people in the room who also have things to add on to this question or remarks? Yeah, I see one hand.
Hi, thank you all. Thank you, Rolando and Gloria, for your work and for today. Maybe on top of the last question, Gloria, you identified art institutions embracing decoloniality, or the terminology at least. Maybe for both of you, do you see this as enduring? If so, what makes you think that? If not, what kind of work should be done to sustain it?
Big question. Yeah, no, but good question. Who wants to pick up on one of the questions asked?
We can also look for more questions.
It's the questions, not the answers. No, please, let's try and maybe address the
art institutions and
exactly.
decoloniality. First, as a cop-out, I am not very up-to-date, really, on art and museums. I mean, I go to museums, but it's not what I have focused on, but I find that often with these buzzwords, there's an incredible appeal to be woke and up to date and to, you know, to indicate that one is aware of the times and what seems to be the direction that one needs to be moving into. When I think of, so intersectionality is also one of these buzz terms that has greatly taken on a life of its own. I find it always useful to remember that intersectionality came from social movements, from people out there in the streets wanting change, wanting better lives. Starting already, one could say, with the Black Panthers at the end of the 60s. Then it moved into the academy. So one of the things is that I think it's important to be aware of how a particular concept came into being, what the context was, who brought it forward, and not to sit on it as if it is your property. So that I think is important. The thing about wanting social justice doesn't necessarily entail that you embrace a concept until it seems to belong to you and nobody else can have a say in it. I think openness is very important to start with in general. So that also goes for decoloniality. When I read Rolando's book, then I am convinced we need to study this book like really intensely, that it is almost hubris to call yourself a decolonial institution when you haven't done the work. You need to do the work. He tells you what you need to do and what questions you need to ask. So, I mean, I could repeat that, but Rolando is better at that. So, yeah, I am not, you know, I'm too old to be easily persuaded or seduced by an institution suddenly taking up a term without having done the work.
Maybe only to add, because also in the college, or in the colleges, we are facing a lot of these questions. And it's the question of, I think to be woke should mean to take responsibility, right? Yeah. And it's not about taking power over others, and it's not about privilege of identity. It's about engaging in relationality, creating spaces of engagement, of transformation. And I think that is what is going wrong sometimes when being woke becomes a privilege of identity and a power over others, and which reproduce the logic of power that we want to undo.
Yeah, yeah. And often that has a lot to do with ego, that is also regrettably something that we too often see, that the larger goal of change and justice gets lost when ego makes its appearance.
Well, let's chew on that for a minute. But yeah, I mean, this is also about us taking into account genealogies, positionalities, and how we're all implicated. There was another question, so very concrete one. If the Eiffel Tower is an example of aesthetics. How could we find a form of aesthesis in architecture? But maybe you should then give an example of how aesthesis works differently also through this question.
Yes, it's also a question with many ways. I think Eiffel Tower is not really used as an example of aesthetics itself, but as an example, because also it was not initially understood as being aesthetic, but it was but more as an architecture that represents the power of abstraction and the power of elevating yourself above the world on the iron structure, right? And so this politics of aesthetics, that is this power of the gaze. And I think practices of aesthesis, for example, just to refer to the essay, the first artist is actually the curatorial work of one of our ancestors now, Alana Lockhart, who organized the bebop. And the bebop was a place of encounter of the voices that have been silenced, right? And this is aesthesis, right?
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, so those are the questions. I want to go back to your second point, Gloria, which is you basically saying, well, how is it that decolonial thought and practices resonate much more clearly in the museum?
Seemingly, I don't even know if
let's
it
take
is
that
true,
as a point of departure for our conversation now about that, as opposed to academia. And I thought that was actually a really interesting question, also because I remember, because this booklet has, this essay has been commissioned by the Mondriaan Fund. It's been 15 years ago since the Mondriaan Fund had a diversity prize. Yeah, it was, yeah, do we remember that diversity prize? I see a certain director in the room who actually was given that prize. It's, yeah, I'm going to call you out, Charles Esche from the Van Abbe Museum. He's smiling and keeping silent, obviously. But it's interesting how that ties into these questions about, yeah, how does that work? How does that work differently? How is it? Would you first of all agree that it resonates more clearly in the museum world or art world at large than academia? I think we both sort of move in those worlds a little bit. So, but and if so, why?
Well, here is my sociologist part, right? Which is, I think the universities have undergone a very thorough process of neoliberalization. So we are now in neoliberal universities.
It's that factory with the cookies?
Yes. And that's where all topics that were not productive directly for the state or the market were expelled from research funding, and where, well, critical thinking was basically evicted, you know. They remained using the term critical thinking, but for cognitive process of being reflexive and things like that, but not critical thinking in engaging with social justice and the transformation of society, or very seldomly. So I think a lot of people that are with the urgent need of transforming society and transforming the relation to Earth didn't found a place in universities, but found a place in the arts, because the arts were still praising being radical and changing the world, something that had no more place in the universities. And in a way, the arts have become a place of, we might call it research, of discussion, of discourse creation, where these topics are central. And we see it here at Melly, we see it at Van Abbe Museum, at the Jan van Eyck, you know, this is places where these topics become central, and where I think this book, for example, it's unthinkable in the academia, no academic publisher will publish such a thing. You know, it will not pass any review, you know, and any budget of printing.
Yeah.
Because too many images, and what do you mean color?
And the colors.
And it's too short, and it doesn't have a tremendous bibliographical apparatus, you know, all of that. So I think we see, at least particularly in the Netherlands, a migration of the central questions of society that have to do with the loss of earth and social justice, with climate justice and social justice, into the cultural world, and where they become very prominent. So, unfortunately, the university is still trying to catch up, and of course there are student movements pressing for these type of conversations, but there is no real spaces for the academics, for the time of thinking and the time of engaging with this type of topics that we really need in the university.
How interesting. I'm thinking, you know, of the 3 committees that were instituted by UvA when we were working in diversity. There were 2 other committees. One was finance. The other was democratisering and decentralisering, which had to do with how power would be divided in the university. And I think the one on finance, who also gave recommendations what needed to happen, that is the only one that its recommendations were followed. The other 2, you know, here is a big drawer, let's put the reports in there and certainly not do anything with them. So that would confirm your diagnosis, Rolando. I think that, sure, I recognize this neoliberalization. Don't exactly, I don't know, but I don't really see that flight of critical people.
From the young generation that
Of
are
the
sitting
young,
at home.
Okay.
I think many just went through to the arts.
Yeah.
To ask these
Maybe.
questions.
Yeah, is that?
Yeah, I think so, definitely.
Okay. But I also think that there is something in there about self-representation of the academy. What are the issues that we should study? And that those questions, there are some small movements at the edges of the academic world. For instance, one person can make a difference in NWO, the Dutch Research Council that distributes money. I never got any money at that particular institution because we don't do race in the Netherlands. We don't have it. Now, finally, you see some people getting funding to do research on race. By no means is it a grandiose number of people. You see little flurries of change. But I think it still has to do deeply with self-understanding also, apart from this thing about the neoliberalization. So what brings in money, but also a lack of renewal in subjects that we should be engaging with in the academy, subjects like climate or justice and equality. Those things are, that's not our thing.
On the other hand, I think we are really living a great time in terms of, for example, white innocence and its reception as well.
But it is that I was emerita that I could write it.
Yeah. So what we see is a lot of academic knowledge production. I think the last sort of 7 years we have Dutch racism, we had white innocence, We've been writing books on Rotterdam slavery, Utrecht and slavery, Amsterdam and slavery. All right here. You can buy them at Melly. And by the way, Rolando and I also co-curated something that was called What is Left Unseen. I have it here. I co-wrote a guide on the Dutch slavery heritage. So there's a lot of knowledge production, but it kind of also is an inside-outside job. It's never only within academia. So there's a lot, and you have your summer school. There's this summer school in Amsterdam. So people are going outside also. So there's this rigidity of the academia that makes people step out. Whereas for the arts, that works. I mean, if we look at the arts sector right now, we have Falika Smulders as head of the history at the Rijksmuseum. We have Charles Landvreugd now, who's head of research at the Stedelijk Museum. Shout out to Charles, sitting right there. Anthony Heidweiler, who's the head of the director now of the art Performative Arts Academy in Amsterdam. We have Jurgen Tjongafon, who's now, I mean, there's loads of wonderful people of color now actually heading those art institutions also. And we have our veteran, of course, Ernestine Gonvalius, who is now blissfully a free agent, not having to carry that institution anymore, the Belmer Park Theater. So there's also much more movement there, right? I mean, that also really extremely makes a difference. Vivian, you still have some questions? We have 5 minutes, and there's questions. Yeah, let's take some questions from the room or remarks. Ernestine Gonvalius, please.
Just a short observation. Yeah. Because you were talking about the museums becoming interested in decoloniality, and but I think it's not for the arts in general, because the performing arts are not there yet. So now we have some people who have important positions. Yeah. That doesn't say anything about decoloniality or etc. Right. Because there's a very superficial way in which they are dealing with these begrippen. Yes. So actually there's a lot has to be done. Also in the education system, in the academies of the art, the performing arts. I'm talking about the performing arts. And I've seen that students read the books. They have read your book especially. But, I mean, from Professor Wekker, and I certainly will tell everybody to read your book, but not, they actually don't understand where it comes from. So these contents are being used without the depth, what you said, without the work. So it's not the arts in general.
Very good point. Thank you for that. And maybe also just to reiterate that this intervention, Decolonize the Museum, that took place 2015, the Trophy Museum has been a very important incentive also for museums then in general to think about. Also the outside coming inside and raising these critical questions with Simone Zeefuik and others. And Wayne Mudd is being within the Institute, also creating space for people to hold space actually for this intervention, I think is very, very important. Vivian is like winking at me like, wrap it up, girl. And indeed, we want to really go to, it is festive after all, so we do have some drinks for us waiting. But as a closing, when the revolution is over, what do we do? But what is next for both of you? What's next? What are you doing on Monday when you go back to work? What is awaiting you, Rolando?
Well, I think what Gloria was saying in her talk is it's about continuing our friendships, our relations, our working together. And of course, a lot of administrative work on Monday. It's really fun.
Gloria, what about you?
Well, that, of course, that is part of life. But I'm also, yeah, I'm continuing the work. And now, in a different form, I'm writing another kind of book now. But I'm definitely continuing what I need to do.
Yeah. Writing a novel that we are eagerly awaiting. Looking forward to it. Thank you both so much for doing this. Rolando, you weren't really 100% feeling a little bit shaky, but I think you managed very, very well. Thank you so much, and please continue the celebration and the enjoyment, because it is an amazing job what you pulled off here. And I'm going to give all my students this book. I've now at the HKU. I'm going to dive with my students into this work. Gloria Vekker, thank you so much for your beautiful talk.
Nancy.
And please stay with us, and let's continue this conversation elsewhere. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you so much, Rolando. Thank you so much, Gloria, Elko, Mondriaan. We'd also like to give a very big thanks to our hospitality team that have been working from this morning, for my colleagues in the room, Rosa, Marjolein, Lean, Marijn, Jeroen. Upstairs, we have Jesse and Akane and our director, Sophia, Hernandez, Choi. Thank you, everyone who's been joining us online. We'll now be concluding. For those of us who are here, we'll have a reception. Please be welcome to move between the spaces here and the exhibition of Sascha Huber upstairs. We just ask that if you do, you could please leave your drink in the space where you are. So let the festivities begin. Thank you so much.